The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host, Beth.
Hello, all you wanderers.
You know, Beth, the last couple days, the weather's been pretty mild, around the high 60s. That means summer's coming to an end, and fall is right around the corner. And you know, I love fall.
Me too.
That means no bugs. The tree leaves are turning gorgeous colors and falling from the trees onto the ground. And, you know, just leaving those big, colorful piles that you just can't help but jump in. And then there's the apple cider and donuts at the apple orchards.
My favorite.
Yeah, and getting ready to carve pumpkins with the kids into jack-o'-lanterns. And all leading up to, by far, my favorite holiday that I wait for all year, Halloween.
Which you've been talking about since July.
Right. And I started decorating some slowly, you know, getting ready. So it kind of got me all excited to do a early haunted episode. So I know we discussed each of us doing a haunted story that kind of piqued our interests. What did you find?
Well, the haunted location I'm going to talk about is the infamous Chelsea Hotel in New York City. I know I say this a lot, but I really want to go there.
Well, it's not that far away. We should go check it out.
Yeah, we can't, and I'll explain why in a little bit.
Oh, that figures. Okay, I'm all ears. Please do tell.
The Chelsea Hotel, a 12-story Queen Anne-style building built in 1884, is located at 222 West 23rd Street in New York City. It's beautifully Gothic, entirely made of red brick, with wrought iron balconies, peaked roofs, and chimneys. It's actually considered the second oldest skyscraper in the city. Nicknamed the Dame of New York City, it was conceived after the economic crash of 1873 by architect Philip Hubert, who designed it as a cooperative apartment building. He built several co-ops, actually, and each one was relatively successful. Hubert grew up in a family devoted to the philosophy of Charles Fourier, who believed in self-contained settlements that would meet the needs of all the inhabitants. Hubert decided that New York was ready for such a place. People could share fuel and services as a way to save money. He reserved apartments in the Chelsea for people who helped build it, including construction workers, interior designers, and plumbers. Then, he filled the other units with a mix of artists, musicians, and actors. The top floor even housed 15 artists' studios.
Wow, that's pretty forward thinking.
Yeah, back in the 1800s, that's really cool. The Chelsea was converted into a hotel in 1905 by breaking up the original apartments into smaller rooms, but the clientele remained just as varied and eclectic, as shown by its motto, a rest stop for rare individuals. Anyone who was anyone stayed at the Chelsea, and the list is incredible. Mark Twain, O. Henry, Thomas Wolfe, Edgar Lee Masters, Dylan Thomas, Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs, Gregory Corso, Charles Bukowski, Jackson Pollock, Andy Warhol, Edie Sedgwick, Candy Darling, Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Leonard Cohen, Sam Shepard, The Grateful Dead, Patti Smith, Dee Dee Ramone, Tom Waits, Dennis Hopper, and Madonna.
Wow.
Just to name a few.
That's quite the lineup.
It is quite the lineup, and I actually shortened the list.
I would have loved to have been a fly on a wall during those times. Can you imagine what took place there?
A lot of creativity, and I'm sure a lot of wild parties.
Oh, I bet.
Not everyone who lived at the Chelsea could afford the Chelsea, but it didn't actually seem to matter. You were let in more on your cred than your pocketbook. One well-known example is the writer O. Henry, who repeatedly checked in under several different names so he could avoid creditors. And not to stereotype, but since the Chelsea was the place for artists and musicians, it became known for other things too. Keith Richards apparently once said that you had to be a certified dealer to get a job as a bellboy.
Now that's freaking funny.
And many collaborations took place there as well. Sir Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001 A Space Odyssey while living at the Chelsea, and reportedly got into an argument or two or three with co-writer and director Stanley Kubrick, who was also living there. Another story bordering on legend is that one resident mistook Jimi Hendrix for a bellboy, and he happily carried her bags to her room.
Oh, wow. Can you imagine Hendrix carrying your bags up to a room?
I kind of can. I could kind of see him being like, yeah, oh, well, okay, whatever. More recently, actor Ethan Hawke lived at the Chelsea, and it is the setting for his 2001 film Chelsea Walls. But the who's list just goes on and on. Playwright Arthur Miller moved into room 614 after his divorce from Marilyn Monroe. Bob Dylan wrote Sarah in room 211, and Janis Joplin got down and dirty with Leonard Cohen in room 424. Andy Warhol shot parts of his Chelsea Girls film at the hotel in 1966, and Madonna, who was a former resident, returned to the Chelsea for photo shoots for her sex book in the 90s. I remember that book. That was a big controversial book.
Was it? Yeah, I was never into Madonna.
Well, no, but I remember going to the bookstore when I was in like junior high school, and finding it and wanting to look at it because it was so taboo, but it was wrapped in plastic, so you couldn't open it.
Oh.
Anyway, that was a big aside. In the last half century, the Chelsea was run as an informal artists' colony. Some residents traded their art for rent, or they lived there completely free, which was fine because other residents were charged exorbitant amounts. Plus, tourists flocked to the place where so much history unfolded to rent rooms. For many years, a man named Stanley Bard was in charge of who lived there and for how long. His father had been one of the 3 partners who purchased the Chelsea in 1943. So the building just has that kind of vibe, like it's sucked in all that creative energy over the last 200 years. Because, I mean, it's always had artists and residents, so it's just perfectly conducive to all that artsy kind of musy stuff.
Right.
And it's had an incredible history. Not just the many, many famous living legends who have resided there, but some former residents who have stuck around in the afterlife.
Well, what ghost wouldn't want to go back and hang out there?
I know. To hone in on who exactly might be haunting the Chelsea, we have to look at the many reported deaths that have occurred there. In 1908, Society girl Elmira Wilcox died of an overdose of sleeping medication. According to a New York Times article written that same year, a half-written love letter was found near her body. In it, she had written, quote, "I took 1 drugstore last night, all but the shelving. Tonight I have taken 2, and am writing you while I woo the sleeping god," end quote. Which is just sad.
That it is.
In 1909, artist Frank Kavecki shot himself after he was robbed of money that was meant to be given to the Hungarian Sick and Benevolent Society. In 1912, Titanic survivors were put up at the Chelsea. The lore says that a woman named Mary was awaiting her husband's return from England. When she discovered that he had gone down with the ship, she went up to the 5th floor and hung herself out of grief. Another version of the tale is that she was a survivor herself, but her husband had perished. Regardless, Mary's ghost has been seen often at the hotel, most notably by actor Michael Imperioli of The Sopranos. Imperioli shared his encounter on the TV show Celebrity Ghost Stories in 2010. He said that while he was living at the Chelsea for 2 months in 1996, he encountered a weeping woman hunched on the floor. She was dressed in 19th century garb. When he asked her if she was okay, a light fixture popped behind him. He turned around to look in the direction of the blown bulb, and when he turned back, the woman was gone. When he heard the stories connected to Mary, he apparently moved out a week later.
It is a bit creepy.
It is. In 1922, Etelka Graf, the daughter of a well-to-do silk merchant, cut off her own hand with industrial shears and leapt out a fifth-floor window. So, it sounds like the fifth floor has some pretty bad mojo.
Yeah, just a little bit.
In 1953, Welsh poet Dylan Thomas was living at the Chelsea. A known alcoholic, Thomas allegedly boasted that he'd downed 18 straight whiskeys. I think that's a record. And he died that night. Initially, the cause of death was alcohol poisoning, but more recent evidence suggests he was fighting pneumonia at the time. Either way, people who live at the Chelsea or stay there as overnight guests have reported run-ins with his apparition, most frequently in the hotel bar.
I wonder if they're running into him or he's running into them since he was so drunk when he passed.
In 1967, Edie Sedgwick, one of Andy Warhol's more well-known entourage members, lit her room on fire. She didn't pass away there, though. But author Charles R. Jackson committed suicide there the following year, and that was the 60s. The 1970s weren't much brighter for some who lived at the Chelsea. Billy Maynard, a photographer who worked predominantly with glam rockers and trans performers, was beaten to death in his room. But perhaps the most notorious death at the Chelsea occurred in 1978. Sid Vicious of the Sex Pistols and his girlfriend Nancy Spurgeon were living at the Chelsea. Nancy was found in the bathroom of room 100, stabbed in the stomach. Police arrested Vicious and charged him with the murder, but he died of an overdose 4 months later before the case went to trial. So, of course, we'll never know if he was guilty or not, but Nancy's ghost has been seen wandering the hotel ever since. In 1989, 2 more deaths occurred. Those of composer Virgil Thomson, who is credited as developing the American sound in classical music with over 150 compositions, and Christina Superstar, a club kid. Virgil Thomson was 92 when he passed of natural causes. But Superstar, who was part of the drag group Club Kids, perished under mysterious circumstances. It is unknown if it was natural suicide or homicide. Brian Bothwell, a longtime Chelsea resident and multimedia digital artist, said he often was bemused by the front desk staff needing to respond to ghostly complaints. He was quoted as saying in a Chelsea community news publication that, "The ones I thought had interesting stories were the good folks working behind the front desk. They always had to address the ghost problem and move overnight guests from one room to the next. There was always a guest calling the front desk wanting to change rooms due to something they saw or something they felt." The same article cited another possible haunting, this time by a girl named Victoria who passed away of AIDS. Victoria liked to dress as Betty Boop. After her death, the new tenant asked for her room to be changed because she allegedly saw Victoria's Betty Boop visage reflected in a mirror.
Well, that doesn't sound very scary. I mean, I can think of a lot worse to see.
Yeah, all the other deaths that have been there.
Betty Boop?
Yeah.
Nothing scary about Betty Boop.
No. And it's just fun to say Betty Boop.
That it is.
If you are so inclined to know more about the hauntings at the Chelsea, there's a fantastic blog called Living with Legends, Chelsea Hotel blog by Ed Hamilton, a longtime resident. He has amassed numerous stories of paranormal happenings at the hotel, including room numbers. Some examples include faucets turning on and off, and disembodied voices and apparitions. So, the Chelsea, so steeped in cultural history, has had some issues of late that have nothing to do with ghosts, but with ongoing, seemingly never-ending renovations, which Hamilton has also recorded in his blog. Since 2011, the Chelsea has been mostly empty, as new owners have been slowly renovating the building. Rooms haven't been rented to hotel guests since 2011, and there are only roughly 50 full-time tenants in the building. And those tenants have been dealing with nonstop dust, construction noise, flooded hallways, asbestos, and interruptions in their water lines for over a decade.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's why we can't really go and stay there.
I see now.
But what a gorgeous building the Chelsea once was. If you Google pictures online of its interior, it is a spellbinding mix of bohemian and Gothic glory. Yeah, the apartments are tiny, some only 220 square feet, but such vibrant, colorful life fills that space. Art on top of wild wallpaper, deep jewel tones, and shelves of books. It's a place my little bohemian, artsy soul would love to live in.
Well, the Chelsea's always fascinated me. I mean, there's so much history there that it's like it has a heartbeat of its own.
It
It's
really
like a
does.
living thing.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's because there have always been artists there forever.
Yeah, and even with a 220 square foot room, with everything that was going on there,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much time did you really probably spend in your room anyway? I imagine they were all over that place.
That's true. I didn't think of it that way. Hey, did you know? In 1915, Dr. D.K. Briggs of Blackville, South Carolina, declared 30-year-old Essie Dunbar dead after an epilepsy attack. Essie was buried the following morning, but her sister wasn't able to get to the cemetery until the coffin was already in the ground. Wanting desperately to see her sister one more time, she begged the ministers to dig up Essie's coffin. They agreed, and when the screws were removed and the lid opened, Essie sat up and smiled at her sister. Essie lived for another 47 years. Who'da thunk it? So, what haunted location did you pick for our haunted episode?
Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the Pickfair Estate haunting.
Ooh, okay. It rings a bell, but I'm not sure why.
Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks were the it couple of the 1920s. In fact, the press was so enamored by them that they named the lavish estate the couple shared Pickfair. Get it? Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks?
Yes, I get it. Very clever. It was the precursor to the Benefers and the Brangelinas.
Right. Mary Pickford was America's sweetheart. Known for her long blonde ringlets, she was nicknamed Blondie Locks. When she cut her hair, fans were horrified to the point that one historian made the joke that you would have thought she murdered the American eagle.
So the opposite of Jennifer Aniston's haircut that was copied round the world.
Right. Douglas Fairbanks was a star in his own right, devilishly handsome and debonair. Although he may have had an eccentric side, it seems that he enjoyed jogging naked, and even had an underground running track so he could jog privately in the nude.
I suppose that's better than the alternative. I wouldn't want to be outside and see a naked guy running towards me. Do you think he was barefoot or did he wear shoes?
Well, I mean, the freedom of just running naked, it appeals to me.
Oh, okay.
But it's not for everyone. And it's probably not for everyone to see. Anyways, the Pickford estate was built on the 15-acre grounds of an old hunting lodge at 1143 Summit Drive in San Ysidro Canyon in Beverly Hills. It was a Tudor-style mansion with 22 rooms and had the first reported in-ground swimming pool in Beverly Hills. Inside, Pickfair was unmatched in its decor. Filled with parquet floors and a collection of 18th century English and French furniture, the rooms held other antiques as well. They even had furniture from the Barberina Palace and authentic King Louis the
16th pieces. I think he was the famous furniture guy.
That's the one. King Louis the 16th.
Roman numerals, y'all. They mess us up every time.
Fairbanks enjoyed collecting Chinese objects d'art that he and Pickford brought back from their trips to Asia and displaying them in their home. But that's not all. The mansion also featured an Old West-style saloon, complete with an ornate burnished mahogany bar from a saloon in Auburn, California, as well as paintings by Frederick Remington. And at one point, Pickford purchased not just one, but 12 Remington pieces for her home.
Wow, that sounds really cool. But do you think his running track was under the house? I'm sorry. I can't. Why would anybody jog naked? I don't get it. I don't have to get it. You can continue. I was wondering if his running track was under the house.
Well, it's a valid question. And I guess the only way to know what it would feel like is to do it.
That's not happening.
So we can take you out in the middle of the woods somewhere and you can try this out. And
the woods. Yeah, that's a safe place when you're not wearing any clothes.
As you can imagine, being invited to dinner at the Pick Fair was a big deal. And dinner was filled with big names like, Charlie Chaplin, who just happened to live next door, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, actress Dorothy and Lillian Gish, Greta Garbo, playwright George Bernard Shaw, Albert Einstein, Helen Keller, H.G. Wells, Amelia Earhart, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Joan Crawford, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, writer Pearl S. Buck, Charles Lindbergh, Arthur Conan Doyle, Thomas Edison, and Gloria Swanson. Not to name drop or anything.
Wow. I think they've earned the bragging rights just like the Chelsea. That's quite the list.
Pick Fair was so famous that Life magazine dubbed it, quote, a gathering place only slightly less important than the White House and much more fun. It was during the 1930s when Pickford first started telling her guests about some uninvited guests that she suspected she had in her home.
Uh-oh.
It started with unexplained sounds, most notably from the attic. She said that she was a heavy sleeper, but would often wake up to the sound of tramping of heavy feet over her head. At one point, she allegedly addressed the ghost saying, quote, I wouldn't treat you this way. It isn't ladylike. I don't expect to be treated in this manner.
Good for her.
Pickford said that the noises then stopped.
Good.
She wasn't the only one in the house having issues with possible ghosts. The cook apparently ran out of the kitchen after seeing an apparition she described as a dark woman. The cook claimed she tried to speak to the woman, but when she did, the dark woman just vanished. For his part, Fairbanks acknowledged that his wife and staff certainly thought the home was haunted, but that he personally didn't believe in ghosts, and he didn't believe Pickfair was haunted at all. Pickford and Fairbanks divorced in 1936.
Perhaps because Fairbanks didn't believe her.
But Pickford lived in Pickfair until her death in 1979. So see, he let her stay there after.
With the ghosts.
Right. He didn't want to be alone. So maybe he really did believe.
Oh, good thinking.
In 1980, the home was sold to investor and businessman Jerry Buss. Originally, he planned to raze the property, but he decided it was better to preserve the historical mansion, and instead, he had renovations done. In 1988, the home was sold to singer Pia Zadora, and the ghosts made themselves known. It was shortly after she and her family moved into the Pickfair estate that odd things started happening. She shared her story on the TV show Celebrity Ghost Stories, describing an instance when she heard her daughter screaming, saying that she saw a woman laughing by her bed. At first, Zadora assumed her daughter had dreamt the whole thing or was just jittery about moving into a new home. But Zadora herself started experiencing things also. Not sure what to do, Zadora and her husband had the house razed in the hopes that it would eradicate the spirits, I would assume. She said during the Celebrity Ghost Stories episode, quote, when we moved into the house, it was beautiful. Everything was perfect. It was a dream, but weird things started to happen. So my husband and I, after trying to figure out what to do, decided we were going to have the house razed.
Yeah. See, remember before when I said I thought it kind of rang a bell when you first started talking about it? It was because I remember that. And I remember that it was a big deal. And it's just a tough situation because I'm assuming they tried other things first. Like that wasn't the first thing they decided to do to raise the house. And I think it's easy to pass judgment as an outsider, but I'm sure it's completely different to live in a home where you don't feel safe. And I don't think they felt safe there. It's one thing to feel uneasy when weird things happen, but it's different when you feel threatened.
And I guess they probably didn't think to themselves, maybe it's the grounds that are haunted and not just the house.
Right.
Not wanting to risk ridicule, Zadora and her husband publicly blamed a termite infestation. And they were met with a nasty public backlash over it.
Yeah, it was nasty. I remember.
Everyone in Hollywood seemingly had an opinion about their decision, and none of it was nice. Looking back, Zadora said, quote, "If I had a choice, I would have never torn down this old home. I loved this home. It had a history. It had a very important sense about it, and you can deal with termites, and you can deal with plumbing issues, but you can't deal with the supernatural."
Yeah, I get both sides. On one hand, I totally see where she's coming from, especially when you have kids in the house and you want them to feel safe and you don't know what to do because you can't really see the thing or reason with the thing that is threatening you. Or maybe that's how they looked at it. But I also understand the sadness in losing such a gorgeous house with so much history.
Oh, most definitely. I don't know. I think it was me. I couldn't bring myself to demo a building like that. I think I'd just move out and let somebody else deal with it.
I'd be interested in knowing, too, if you said it was Jerry Buss, I guess, that lived in between, whether he experienced anything. But it's also interesting because you had said originally he thought about raising the house, too.
Right.
And then he restored it. So I don't know.
I don't know either. Well, so there you have it. 2 haunted locations from opposite sides of the country. They had quite a bit in common. Lots of artistic people that came and went through both places.
And some celebrity ghost stories connections to both of them.
Yep.
And, it'd be interesting to try and figure out just who was haunting Pickfair, because I don't think they ever really figured it out.
I don't think so either. But how do you figure that out?
Well, I don't know. They have good ideas of who's haunting the Chelsea.
Well, there are so many people that came in and out of that place. Can you imagine?
Well, yeah, it could be a lot of assumption and speculation and, Well, it must be whoever because, yeah, you're right.
I mean, unless a ghost from the other side takes a selfie with you or is in an image.
At least it's not Fairbanks still jogging around naked.
That would be a good pit to prove the afterlife is real. All right. As always, you can check out our sources in the show notes. And there's a lot more that we didn't include, but you can go check it out for yourself through some of our sources and delve deeper into it.
Yeah, you can read more about everything. So I guess that about wraps it up for this episode. So thanks for joining us.
And we'll see all you wanderers next week.
We sure will.
See you soon.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment. It really helps us move up the list so people can find us. See you next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.